Hey everybody, welcome to Performance Anxiety. I'm your host, Mark. And before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor, AKG, for sending us their Podcaster Essentials kit. The microphone and headphone combo is amazing. If you want to start your own podcast, this is the most economical, highest quality way to do it. Henry Frayne is a laid-back guy, and that's reflected in his music. It's relaxed, thoughtful, and purposefully made. From Ack-Ack to Area, The Moon 7 Times to Lanterna, his guitar playing is clean and beautiful. He focuses on instrumentals that let your imagination work. Here he talks about his career, his trouble with Apple algorithms, and recreating songs from fragments on old cassettes. He also sheds light on what the Ack-Ack Hotel is. Listen to his new album, Hidden Drives, on Badman Recordings. It'll put you in a great place. Follow Henry and Lanterna on social media. Follow us at Performance ANX. Rate and review this show. That'll put me in a great place. Buy us some coffee if you like at ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety. Merchandise is available at performanceanx.threadless.com. So grab a soothing drink, maybe some tea, and settle into Henry Frayne and Lanterna on Performance Anxiety, a proud member of the Pantheon podcast family.
You're listening to Performance Anxiety. I'm Henry Frayne from the band Lanterna. We have a new album out called Hidden Drives on Badman Recording Co. And you can order the new album through Badman at www.badmanrecordingco.com.
Thank you so much. I don't know. Oh, there's my dog. My son's moving the cars around, so my dog is going nuts right now.
I've got a neighbor's dog who she sits it by the window, and it's not quite as loud, but it's over there.
And he's like three rooms away too, so he's an Australian Shepherd and Boxer mix, so he's like 88 pounds of just goofiness.
Wow.
He's such a goofball. He's hilarious, though. So to find out a little bit more about where you're at now with the music, I like to start at the beginning to find out how you got there. So I like to know a little bit about growing up. Was there a lot of music in the household? Were you playing music early on? What was it like? What were your influences when you were really starting to get into music?
I guess my dad was born in around New York City, Fort Lee, New Jersey. Right by, grew up right by that big bridge.
Yep.
A couple houses away from that, and so he lived there for a long time. He met my mother. They got married. They lived there in New York City for a little while until I was born, and then just after I was born, pretty much he got a job here at the University of Illinois as a professor. And they came out here, and they've been here ever since. And I've been in Champaign, Illinois, ever since myself, sort of give or take trips and parts of the year on the East Coast in Maine and such. So he was a classical music fan from childhood, probably. So just growing up, yes, there were records, everywhere, and he really is a fan. And so he knew classical music, but I was just thinking about this the other day, sort of things like, we did go to see Yellow Submarine in the theaters when I was, a few years old.
Oh, wow.
And then a few years later, he or I at the Salvation Army, we must have grabbed a copy of the soundtrack for Yellow Submarine. So, I mean, he didn't always know, gee, what is Henry going to be interested in, or my brother Patrick, but he did, kind of buy things that were like, hey, here's an important to me, Beatles, sort of half an album of some of their most interesting songs and such, and part one of the White Album on 8-track, and so just sort of until I could really sort of realize for myself that you could buy vinyl records, and there was the stuff you heard on the radio, you didn't have to tape it on your little cassette player and get a good copy of it.
Right.
You could actually go somewhere and buy a pretty good copy of it if you had the money. So radio was very important, sort of pop radio, as well as sort of there was a local college station here and another sort of private pop rock station. So
Okay.
radio was a lot of what I was growing up with in the 70s.
When did I mean, were you taking music lessons as a kid? Did your parents get you into music, or was it something that you gravitated towards playing music?
Well, and not at first. There was violin lessons that didn't quite take, and then there were piano lessons, and we bought a piano, and the piano lessons really didn't go anywhere, and so there was that sort of the mid um, early teens when I just sort of had given up on that sort of stuff and didn't really think about music or playing music or that sort of moment with everyone, like, hey, I can do this, I can do podcasts, or I can be an accountant, or I can, I'm a musician, that's what I want to do. And so it really was a few years of starting to buy records of things like Boston or Foreigner or Starcastle, and then just suddenly once I really, in the fall of '78, once Boston's second album came out, they went on tour. Foreigner's second album came out, and they went on tour. Just a couple months apart, they came to the Assembly Hall here in Champaign, and it was just like that first Boston concert was just like, even though I was in, double C section, and they'd sold behind the stage, so I was just like, wow, this is great. I got tickets
Right.
behind the stage. What does that mean? I guess you'll be looking at the curtain behind the stage, or they took the curtain down. But a few weeks later, it was that Foreigner concert with Ian McDonald on guitar and flute as well.
Right.
That almost right after that, I was just like, I got to call the guitar store. I got to start taking guitar lessons. And so that a friend's dad had an acoustic guitar. That summer, year, before that, I'd always been looking at it, and we'd gone to some music shops and looked at guitars. But it was really seeing a concert and just thinking, wow, an electric guitar would be really cool.
When did you really decide to start playing with people? I mean, when did playing with bands really become an option for you, or something that you wanted to do?
I was pretty soon after, within almost just a year or so. A friend of mine who'd gone to another high school, kind of across town, kind of linked up with him, and he just bought a Rogers drum kit, and we started listening to Cheap Trick and The Clash and Queen. Wow. And so that's when we really just started putting together, Tommy Shocker and the Deviates, and that was just once we met Tommy, and once the Deviates came together, it was just, there was no stopping us. We did that one show, and then New Year's Eve 1980, I think.
Oh wow.
We never played again, but that was sort of a starting point of some friends, and then I kind of moved on towards that, away from that.
Sounds like it was a little punkier, poppier music than what you're doing now. So is that the case?
Yeah, it was definitely, covers. But at that first, someone asked me a few weeks ago, what was your first song in that first band with Eric Stenzel and Tommy Shocker? I started to come up with this song called Ain't Got No Fiery, and Fiery was the name of a dog that my parents had. And it just, for some reason, the drummer Eric Stenzel said, Ain't Got No Fiery. And so that was sort of my first song that I started carrying around from one band to the next.
Wow.
We did actually play Ain't Got No Fiery in, me and a friend, Kevin Merfield, on bass, separately joined a band that would become known as Lodestone Destiny, a very heavy metal band. But when we joined them, they were just sort of playing Queen and Eric Clapton songs and things like that. But
wow.
So I did carry my song Ain't Got No Fiery to Lodestone Destiny, and finally last year of high school with that green double Yardbirds record, Greatest Hits in Hand.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And a TV TV advertised double album called Wild Thing, which had every garage rock uh, song you ever needed to have.
Yeah.
Senior year of high school, despite what was going on at the time, like new music, punk, new wave, just sort of completely immersed ourselves in the sound of the mid 60s and late 60s. And so the Syndicate did. We did have originals. We did a demo tape, but we also, did covers, and we were together for, about 2 years.
Oh, wow.
What are you going to do your first year out of high school? You're going to kind of play in a band that probably won't, make your life's fortune, but
Right.
I found that out. And,
So that led to Ack-Ack, which I'm trying to find. And here's the thing: I was looking up some of the bands that you're in, and Low Zone Destiny, Syndicate, Ack-Ack, Area. It's really hard to research a band called Area. You get all kinds of weird search results that have nothing to do with music.
Yeah, well, it helps to put in Lynn Canfield was the singer, or Henry Frayne. I played guitar. If you do search for Area and Lynn Canfield, it pops right up. But there was someone in Champaign who started a band called The Arms of Someone New with his friend Mel, and they formed a record company here in Champaign in the mid 80s to release their sort of studio duo albums. And they approached Ack-Ack and released our 2 singles vinyl in the mid 80s. And then Steve Jones with Office Records sort of got Lynn Canfield, the singer, and myself together to form this other studio project called Area. So Steve does have a web page that sort of has, and we're on Project Records out in Portland, reissued a bunch of the Area stuff. So,
oh, wow, okay.
The Area stuff is, sort of the most close to, being well out there. But they're definitely talking to Steve Jones from Area, Arms of Someone New. We have noticed that there was an Italian sort of prog rock band called Area, and of course Apple Music sort of just puts us all together. So you've got these sort of these albums from the 70s, and then the Area albums. I don't know if they'll ever untangle that.
I guess that's the way the algorithms work. I don't know if it's any undoing it.
Yeah, I think if you approach them, I recently, there's an artist program for Apple Music, and I did approach them and said, yes, I'd like to claim the Lanterna page. And they sort of wrote me back, a real person. And then I did say that it seems like there's one that's like this German sort of ghost stand-up piano, stand-up bass kind of band that released an album called Lanterna, but their name is Magniforco or something. and it's just like, if you look at it, it's like, oh, now Lanterna has these 6 albums plus this album called Magnifork.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, they just mixed it up when they put it into the system, that it's not that. And I emailed it back, and it seems like that has corrected itself, like suddenly within suddenly it's for 5 years I was sort of looking at that thinking like, oh, it's going to take forever to get that new album by Lanterna from 2014
Yeah.
off to the right place. So
You progressed into a band that I find really interesting. And even the name is wild. The Moon Seven Times. How did that come about? How did you come up with that name, first of all? That's a crazy name.
well, it Lynn Canfield was singing an area with me and Steve Jones, keyboards and everything, recording, etc., record company. By the late 80s, we'd sort of were working on some new material, and with a drummer, Brendan Gamble, who was playing in a band called Poster Children at the time, and also a band called Stark at the time, all here in Champaign, everyone playing in a bunch of bands.
I'm familiar with Poster Children. I think I have them on a compilation of some sort.
The Poster Children really, got out there, recorded with Steve Albini, and did one of their albums was called Flower Plower, which had one half by Steve Albini and one half by another producer. And Brendan Gamble played on that, I think, the Steve Albini side, if I'm not mistaken. And so I think Poster Children, got a deal with Warner somehow, or some subsidiary, and so they were one of the early bands in the 90s from Champaign that really started like, wow, they have a major deal, and
yeah,
boom, they started putting out. But they certainly were connected enough that they did, at the beginning, they were on a bunch of probably compilations and things like that. So right around that time, Brendan was touring with this touring band, Poster Children, and also he was singing and playing guitar in a band called Stark. And I would go to see Brendan's band Stark here in town at Tritos, and at that point they were opening for this band called Smashing Pumpkins. Just a couple times within a few month period before they kind of took off.
Yeah.
So really interesting to see some of my friends playing opening for some of these bands. And so Brendan and I were sort of jamming in the basement, coming up with some songs, and we would give the tapes to the singer Lynn Canfield, and she would write lyrics. And so before we knew it, we sort of had enough songs for an album. Out to the record label that had licensed one of the area records in the UK. The record label was Third Mind Records. And so this is, a year later, we sort of sent him a few songs from this new project. And Gary at Third Mind Records said, yes, let's do a record. Let's go. And so the name of the band, we started thinking of names of the band. I think we did decide on Cobalt. And so, the contracts were going to be drawn up, the contracts were going to be on their way. And he looked in a catalog and found the Subway Antler distribution catalog. There was a band from Belgium called Cobalt that had released one 12-inch. We got to come up with the contracts are ready. We need to come up with a name. So somehow the book, the Golden Bow, opened up, and someone saw a sentence, and just The Moon Seven Times was it.
Wow. So, I like that.
I mean, people putting their fingers in books probably happens all the time. With Ack-Ack, I think it was the guitarist, Tim Stevens, who just started looking through the dictionary and got as far as Ack-Ack, and was like, yes, that's the name of the band.
Well, all right. So was this a full-time gig at this point, music, or were you working and just doing it as for fun and extra gig money, or just having something to do?
It was definitely just a a thing I really was excited about. Obviously, I was making my way through college slowly.
Yeah.
First at the community college here, and then I transferred right when I joined Ack-Ack. I transferred over to the University of Illinois and spent 3 years there. Finally got my degree. But with Ack-Ack, it was a band sort of. Group composition, so that we would rehearse 6 nights a week. We were always rehearsing or writing, and it was definitely kind of a night and day experience from my previous bands where we did rehearse, we played shows, we wrote some songs. But with Ack-Ack, in addition to being in college here, I was also going to rehearse at 10 o'clock every night of the week to write ultimately 40 or 50 songs that the band performed over the 2-year period I was
Wow.
with. So it was always, it's always just been sort of a sideline. I did work at a library, and then I worked at part-time at the radio station that's affiliated with the U of I, which is WLL Radio.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, to answer that question, it's always been, I did go full-time there in the late 80s, so pretty good vacation. So I was able to, when I was performing live with Lanterna in the 2000s and such, I could get, a couple weeks off and do a tour of the West Coast or go to Greece for a few weeks
That's
so.
awesome. Wow.
But never. I know people who sort of had that, like, now we have a tour bus. Now we're just doing this. It's all, everything's paid for, or hopefully paid for the next couple of months.
I've seen some podcasters do that. I'm still waiting for some of that, sweet podcasting money, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So Moon 7 Times eventually ended. Was it a good ending? I mean, how did that happen? I'm always interested to know how the transitions go from one band to the next.
Yeah, well, there were a couple times when in the past when it was happening, it was always like, wow, this is the end. Ack-Ack is over, or I'm not playing with Ack-Ack, and I don't know what's the next thing. I'm living in Champaign, Illinois, the middle of nowhere. There's a great music scene here, and there are great people here, but I wasn't quite sure. And almost immediately, I get a call from Steve Jones from Office Records saying, "Hey, I'm doing this project with, Lynn Canfield, sort of keyboardist, background vocalist from Ack-Ack. She's, writing lyrics and singing on some of my projects, on some of my songs. You want to come join Area?" So, sort of, you're at the end of the road. There's no future at all, and suddenly, I'm playing this band Area that released a couple of albums, and after Area, sort of the same kind of, wow, this is how do you keep releasing records and doing music? And we did some demos, and suddenly that Third Mind Records in the UK were like, yes, we'll sign you, and it definitely took some time. They had to get a new backer, which was Roadrunner Records, sort of definitely heavy metal label based in Holland, but they had offices and they, because of Third Mind was very, had a techno background as well, their early heavy influence on that. So it made sense, or it sort of made sense to bring in this ambient sort of rock band as well. We did 3 records as the Moon 7 Times with Third Mind and just Roadrunner. And, it took us a couple of years to record the third one. They put it out, they gave it a couple of months, and then they were like, well, okay, this is not going to work. And so it was sort of getting dropped by that, to answer your question, if you're interested, it's the sort of losing the record deal is kind of like, well, I guess this is kind of, we tried it for 7 years, and now it's kind of the time to kind of do other things. So definitely the Lynn Canfield and Brendan Gamble recorded an album called as Shotgun Wedding, and a beautiful collection of songs. Sort of, when bands start out new, or start new projects, there's always that, there's a group of songs that people have been kind of working on, and suddenly there's that new. So there was definitely that. I had ironically, as Moon Seven Times was starting, I also had a batch of songs that I kind of just wanted to do some instrumental or some longer form songs. So I did ask Brendan Gamble, the drummer from the Moon Seven Times, like, hey, can we do this sort of side project type recording? And I just want to fill up a 90-minute cassette, and I want to do a photo booklet and a box. And I was thinking of calling it Lanterna. And so we, about May 1991, was it 30 years ago?
Yeah.
Is that right?
God.
Brendan and I got together in, living room of the place where he was living, and rehearsing with another band, Stark in that case, and recorded what would become the first Lanterna album, which I really wouldn't do a second album for about 10 years. So it really...
Yeah, I saw that.
Colombia. Se trata de Omar Hernández, quien también tomó por supuesto el festejo del campeón.
What I really like, I was going back and I was listening to Moon Seven Times, and it's really cool. I mean, you've got some this great atmospheric guitar work going. Songs like Through the Roses, Straw Donkey, My Game. There's a great atmosphere.
Of your paper and the coffee you bought, mistaking the silence for a powerful pause. I leaned on your window a little too much, my back to the hallway that ran between us.
This really fiery guitar work, and it's in the leads. It's just, I love it. I think it's fantastic.
It was definitely the Moon Seven Times project kind of grew from just the first batch of songs that Brendan Gamble and I, were working on the music, and then working with Lynn Canfield to sing and write lyrics. That first batch of songs, we kind of recorded it, and then the album didn't come out for about 3 years. So in that time, we were also, writing a bunch of new songs and waiting, like, when can we do that second album?
Right.
And in that time, Brendan Gamble, who was singing, lead and playing rhythm guitar and bass in a band called Stark, which he was in at the time as well. He obviously had his own studio, did his own demos, and so by the time the second Moon Seven Times record, came about, we had a whole collection of songs that we kind of had ready to go, and actually songs that were ready for the third album as well. So,
wow.
When you mention Ack-Ack rehearsed in sort of a really narrow railway hotel near the railroad tracks here in Champaign.
Oh, wow.
And it sort of became known as the Ack-Ack Hotel because there were so many bands playing, and so many bands that members of Ack-Ack were playing in other bands that were just down the hall or upstairs. And so it was kind of a rehearsal studio, but it was a place where people tried to live as well. And so,
oh my gosh.
Even though My Game came out on the second Moon Seven Times record in 1994, that had been recorded on Brendan's Tascam 8-track machine when he was still living back at the Ack-Ack Hotel, and it was one of those songs like he did a mix of it, and Lynn sang on it. It's got some percussion. Brendan Gamble, of course, plays the lead guitar part on it, all the synthesizers. So Brendan's Brendan's guitar style and technique is definitely all over the 7 = 49 and Through the Roses. Jay Bennett from Titanic Love Affair and Wilco played lead guitar on Through the Roses, you mentioned.
Oh, wow.
So if you're, need to be clear that, there were other guitarists playing on Moon Seven Times. I was generally doing some, I was just, a rhythm guitarist, echoey rhythm guitar, and sort of sometimes did some of the fancy stuff, but generally it was, we had other people kind of pitching in for that.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. During Moon Seven Times, you start, as you mentioned, working on some other material that you've just kind of put aside, that it becomes the first Lanterna album. And that kept getting re-released for a while, didn't it? It came out as a cassette box set for a while the first time, and then it was vinyl, and then it came out a couple times on CD. It was re-released a few times. So there was a gap between the first and the second album, but the first album just kept getting re-released, if I'm reading everything correctly.
Certainly. And I mean, I was, in the Moon Seven Times. So I really wasn't recording a new record for Lanterna. And I was happy just to kind of put out that limited edition of 400 booklet boxes, cassettes.
Wow.
And someone in Greece, in those days you got letters from people, and someone had wrote to Lanterna from Greece, a record label called Elfish, and they did, they wanted to put together a Lanterna vinyl, and it was a big deal to sort of compile it, do the artwork here, send over these big boards to Greece, and they did about 500. The label sort of closed up shop soon after, so it's pretty rare. The guy who, one of the partners in Elfish, we did connect a few years ago, and he sent me a picture of, like 12 records sitting on a chair at his dad's place. And he's like, someday when you come, or, I think sending records like that, I think customs would just say, oh, these must be contraband, or these must be rare records. So let's, throw them in the trash or something. So it's sort of like, no, I'll come to Greece again sometime, and I will pick them up from you. And I have 1 or 2 copies of that Greek vinyl. It's kind of this fun, very rare thing, because the label kind of went out of business, and I don't know how many ever really got sold. But a few years after that, Parasol Records here in Urbana did say, "Hey, Henry, why don't you do a Lanterna CD?" And unfortunately, the original cassette was 90 minutes long or close, because of the cassette format. So I did have to kind of jostle things around to get the Parasol CD together. But that's when I really got, Parasol said, "Hey, why don't you do this independent projects press? Why don't you do that letterpress packaging?" And I think I have one of the on my shelf, sort of a Bruce Leisher of Savage Republic Scenic. Mm-hmm. It's sort of when I had been in touch with him once about some perforated stamping or page of stamps or something. But when I really got to know Bruce Leisher at Independent Projects Records was when Parasol said, why don't we'll pay to have the first Lanterna put out in this special packaging.
Oh, wow.
And so that was really pretty cool to do 1,000 run, and I think they did a second run of 1,000. So in the middle of the 90s, I did have kind of a wider release of that Lanterna CD, and even did a tour with Bruce Leisher's band Scenic of the West Coast. We did a half dozen shows, Arizona up to Seattle, and so that was very
cool.
Exciting to sort of go on the road with Lanterna for the first time. I had just started doing some live shows in 1996 as Lanterna with drums, guitar, bass, and we did that live tour in 96 with Scenic. And so it was about the time that Moon Seven Times got dropped by Roadrunner and kind of stopped performing, that I did kind of say like, oh, okay, well, this is the end of the road, so I've sort of, and all this time I had been in Champaign, pretty much working a full-time job and, just doing music on the side. And the photographer for most of the Lanterna records is Kevin Salemi. He was a Moon Seven Times fan, wrote to us many years ago, did photo sessions of us, came out here, did some photo sessions of us for the record company. And so the summer of '97, I was in touch with Kevin Salemi, who lives in Boston, and he had the box set. I'd met him just after I finished that box set, so his photos aren't in that little booklet, but soon after that I did start using his photos, especially on the Parasol release of Lanterna. And so he'd always wanted to do a photo booklet, a photo book with a CD in the back, this concept of music and art and photos. And he was sort of shopping this around. And in the summer of '97, he was like, hey, by the way, I talked to these people at Rykodisc in Salem, Massachusetts, and they want to put out this really fancy little photo. It's just a jewel case, or still it's just but it is a photo booklet and the CD. So yes, that's how the last time the first Lanterna recordings got reissued was finally in 1998 with Rykodisc. And that was sort of an even a little bit bigger distribution, and definitely kind of, I did some touring around that 1998 release.
And you mentioned the photographer, and that's one of the things I love is the imagery with the Lanterna albums, the photography, the artwork on the covers, and they're just beautiful.
Yeah, I always, especially since, he really, I don't know, what I would be doing now Lanterna wise, if it wasn't for him that summer of '97, just saying, hey, wow, there's this company right here in Salem, Massachusetts. And, they, always wanted to, keep working with him, obviously, but I always wanted to, for each new album, go to him and say, what do you have? What's the latest photos you have? What can I see? And, especially for Hidden Drives, the new record, he had this sort of this railway trip somewhere around New Hampshire and the Mount Washington, and just sort of had, it was a few years ago, but I'd sort of had those in the back of my mind, like, I really want to kind of see if we can work with that. And the picture that is on the cover of Hidden Drives is definitely Kevin Salemi really loves to take. He used to have this. It was an old cheap camera that had a certain aspect, but he would do triptychs, so there would sort of be long boxes. And some of the photos in the booklet for Hidden Drives are definitely these triptychs. But the front cover was part of a triptych, but Bruce Leisher really wanted to just use a full frame shot for the front and back. And we kind of zoomed in on that, the top of the train, coming up to a bridge. And
I love it.
The texture of it.
I love it. That's one of the things that always draws me to an album is the visual aspect of it. So there was a 9-year gap or so between the first and the second album. What got you back into writing for Lanterna?
I'm pretty sure that, songs existed from, Moon Seven Times had been going for about a year before I got together with Brendan to start on these first Lanterna recordings. But, there were a bunch of songs that sort of, were always just like, well, that's, I'm going to set that one aside because that's just kind of a, that's not quite a really tight pop song. Or, there were a bunch of things that I had sort of thought like, okay, I really, I do need to think about doing a second Lanterna record. And so I think, I was only signed to Rykodisc for, a year, if that. They quickly got bought by Palm Pictures and Chris Blackwell maybe, and just sort of all the bands were kind of, many bands were dropped. So it was pretty much one of those like, okay, I'm back to back to square one. And
Right.
so I did record Elm Street on my own with a producer here in town, Adam Schmidt, producer, performer. And just kind of thinking, I'm just going to do it the way I did the first record and, get some drum tracks down, overdub, get a finished record, and then see what happens. And what I saw happen is, I sat around for a year, like trying to shop it the way we were trying to shop the first Moon Seven Times recordings. And it's just like, wow, this is hard.
Yeah.
No, record companies really aren't going to jump at an instrumental project, or it's just it's hard to know until you just boom. Someone in Pittsburgh, I think, who Moon Seven Times had met on one of our promotional trips, was in touch with him, and he said, hey, there's this guy, Badman Recording Company, he's out in San Francisco, and he put out this shanty project with a compilation with a bunch of bands. It's really cool. And so somehow I got in touch with Dylan at Badman, and somehow we just kept doing records together until the present day. So
That's
it was
awesome.
really those couple of doors, completely shut, end of the rail, tracks run out, and then suddenly, something does happen. So
Yeah, a relationship that's lasted decades. That's wonderful.
yeah.
I like the fact that the albums are subtle. There's a beautiful subtlety to every single one of your albums, and I love it. I was listening to each of the albums, and there's a lot of different elements in each of the albums. I mean, every album has so many different elements. There's some prog in it. There's some jazz. There's some shoegaze. There's rock. There's even some country, like Summer Break. That's a great song. Brightness sounds like it could be a U2 song from like Unforgettable Fire, Joshua Tree era. I think that's what I love about these albums, is that it's not like an in your face, this is the style that I'm going to be in. There's a lot of progression in the tracks. There's a lot of different styles, and I wasn't expecting it, to be honest with you. I wasn't really sure what to expect with the albums. Knowing that they're instrumental, and was the design always to be an instrumental project for Lanterna, or did you ever think of putting vocals on anything?
I think it pretty much was always, since the main project was Moon Seven Times.
Yeah.
This was kind of like, hey, let's have a 7-minute song and just kind of have the parts there's a song on Highways called Last Practice, which is pretty long, maybe 8 minutes, and it just just to sort of explore that, like, we're just going to play over and over. It's not going to be a real jam or anything, but there's just going to be all these things and melodies and sounds. And I guess it always was meant to, mostly be instrumental. And
Okay.
I know that after Rykodisc, I did, pass through New York and played sort of the second album before I met up with Badman for someone at Palm Pictures, and they listened to one song and shut it off and said, you just have to get lyrics on this, because you just can't There's nothing, and I think I had a feeling that, before I walked into the office that was, it's like, okay, play one song, then turn it off, and then tell him he really has to come up with lyrics for these songs. And I just said, yeah, but I mean, that's what I like doing. It's like, yeah, whatever. I mean, it's not Palm Pictures material. So I did have, if it really would have, I mean, I have had that suggested before, like, your songs really do need to have, you should, I hear lyrics when I listen to your music.
Oh, well, I mean, I disagree because I really like being able to put the album on and just listen to it, not worry about lyrics. And what I mean by that is you never know what you're going to get with lyrics. This is an album that I'm comfortable putting with any of them, but the new one, I'm comfortable putting on for anybody. Like if my kids are home, I can play it. I don't have to worry about bad, filthy language, or I can play it when my friends come over, when my parents come over. It's just a great album to sit down and just relax to. It's so nice to have an album that you can just put on, sit down, have a drink, and not worry about stuff.
I mean, I'm someone who I have written a few lyrics in my life. Steve Jones, for one song, thought it'd be fun if he wrote a verse and I wrote a verse, and Lynn Canfield wrote a verse, and there are a couple of lines of something on the first Lanterna record on a song called Passage. Also, I did sing Lynn's lyrics on a song on the first Lanterna as well, but I'm so happy to sort of maybe sort of a cop out to say, like, oh, I'm gonna be an instrumental band, and it's by necessity, but also I just I can't imagine me writing. I mean, just the concept of writing a couple albums of instrumental music is like, oh yeah, I can probably do that if I put my mind to it. But the thought of like filling those albums with stories, and it's just such an easy thing just to be like, I'm never going to learn how to speak French. I'm never going to write a bunch of lyrics for my songs. And, I am so grateful to Lynn Canfield and Steve Shields and Ack-Ack. I mean, just, that was their thing, to write these stories and lyrics, and it does add a dimension to the the basic idea of writing music that sort of brings things to mind, which is what Lanterna does, I hope. But also in Moon Seven Times or Ack-Ack, there's also that. There also are lyrics that tell stories and create a space. But I just as you say, you never know what you're going to get. Sometimes I'm listening to a band and thinking, this is not, this isn't, they're very good, but why is this person writing brilliant lyrics? What is there? I mean.
Well, one of the things that I really liked about going back and listening to all the albums was that they're very cinematic. I mean, they're very beautiful. They could be movie soundtracks. They're really incredible in that sense, and it makes me use my imagination. I have a tendency when I hear music, instrumental music like this, to just come up with scenarios in my head. If I'm, as long as I'm not doing something else, I put it on. If I'm just kind of sitting back and trying to listen to instrumental music, which I love doing, I will see landscapes in my head or movie scenes, things like that. And that's one of the things that happens with Lanterna is I'm seeing these amazing landscapes and these imagining the taking a trip to a place that in my head matches the music. So that's what I love about instrumental music and Lanterna is that it makes my imagination work.
I wonder. I don't know if you're a. I don't know if it's even a Hammer film, like old films from the 60s and such. There's a film called Quatermass in the Pit where I think they're actually able to, put this big thing, all these wires and gadgets onto, is it Barbara Shelley's actor, her head, and they're able to see the pictures that are in her mind on this fuzzy screen.
Oh, wow.
And, it'd be interesting because when I am in the studio listening, overdubbing, a pretty meticulous process of kind of adding things when I'm working with Mike Brosco, the producer, so that if I was to stop myself and say, well, what do you think of every time you listen to Hidden Drives or Redwoods, or I'd have to stop myself and say, wow, I've never, I think of it. And so it'd be interesting to see, what comes to mind for you. And very interesting to find out that, yes, there are other people who do go on their own journeys with the music, and it is just a starting point. The title is somewhat of a starting point. And as I've said a couple times before, just the title, that's hard enough for me, but I do enjoy that. It is fun to see, a finally decide on, okay, these are the 10 song titles, and boy, I'm done with that. That was hard.
I was going to say, how do you come up with the titles for the songs? Because, if you have lyrics, I can imagine it's usually fairly easy, but with instrumentals, that seems very difficult for me.
Yeah, I do. Once that part, there's a part in the recording process where it's like, okay, we're gonna share these rough mixes with Dylan at Badman, and I don't want to have a situation of talking about a bunch of demo titles and which because it happens enough with Mike Brosco and me that he will doggedly hang on to that first demo title that I come in with, and it's like, just call it C long slow, and so he'll call it that forever, despite the fact that it's like, okay, these are the final titles, let's ship these off of the record company so we can all talk about the same thing. And right. I think for the new record, I did title it Muscle Ridge, as in the muscle, the thing that you have with spaghetti, or the sea creature, and it's a place. It's a channel in Maine, or some islands, the Muscle Ridge Islands. And
oh, wow.
I had sent off, the final titles to Badman, or at least we were talking about them all. And then I did see a map which really did call it Muscle Ridge, as in, you need to row hard to get through this channel of water, because it's very, so.
So the new album, to me, it sounds like it's almost like post-rock that's grown up. I can hear some heavier elements, kind of like if a band like Pelican decided to write music for adults. I hear it more pronounced on this album than some of your previous albums. I heard it a lot more on Island Lake from Backyards. that's really the first time I hear the sound that I'm trying to describe, and I'm not doing a very good job of it, but the sound of Island Lake from Backyards, I hear it a lot more in Hidden Drives than I do in your earlier work, and it's almost a heavier sound, not like a distorted or it's just it almost sounds like post rock, like a Pelican or Grails or a band like that, and I really think that's incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I suppose that Island Lake is one of those songs that sort of probably went back some years and was just was distinctive enough, and I had recordings of it. But you mentioned the Moon Seven Times song "Straw Donkeys,"
Yes,
which is that sort of a plucked delay with drums, and it. I think that Island Lake was a similar type of song that very self-contained, because I could, even though I had bought some bass pedals that helped with writing, because I could just play the bass parts on the pedals, but Island Lake definitely has that, I can pretty much do some of those moves in the bass parts as well as the high parts. And so it was something that I could, just sort of play on the acoustic guitar even, and kind of stuck in my mind for some time. And it does have the synthesizers that were always there on the demos and such, the sort of Mellotron, very kind of first King Crimson album type sound. And so I think that Mike Brosco just had a couple more of these sort of keyboard things that he bought. And so for things like Hidden Drives, definitely played that kind of burbling keyboard part on that.
Okay.
And I did have my sort of a tradition of having this, it was an ARP Omni from the mid-'70s, a really basic string synthesizer with a little synth section on it, but mostly synthesizer strings. And I did kind of a tradition to have that on all of the Lanterna records. And I think there was one record that it didn't get onto, but on this record, it does show up a couple times on Cupola and I think Main 262. There's some really high synth sounds that it's like, oh, that's actually the ARP.
Okay. That Chagrin Boulevard was just a fragment of a song at the end of a cassette tape, and you kind of had to recreate it from memory. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, but it's just me being lazy at the time, because it was from an idea cassette, and I used to number them 1 through 89 or something, and so. I'm sure I was kind of just sat down with the acoustic and was playing this, and it the tape ran out, and I saw the tape ran out, and I was just like, oh, well, I'll remember the second part of that, or wherever I was going with that.
Right.
It was sort of suggesting that sort of descending chord line, but I didn't have it anywhere else other than that, and I was just so lazy that when it came to compiling kind of a new record, all the scraps and demos, I just sort of put that on there and listened to that over and over again as I was driving back and forth between here and Maine, with all the other sort of very scrappy recordings of ideas, instead of saying, okay, I need to sort of take a couple hours and do proper demos so I can listen to them properly and decide on parts. But that was one that I definitely wanted to finish and sort of kind of decide on how the rest of Chagrin Boulevard would go. And I'm glad that I finally put an end to that.
Yeah.
That loose end, literally.
Yeah. also that my favorite song on the album, Redwoods, wasn't originally going to have drums on it.
Yeah, I definitely, Eric Jabot, a drummer, has also been in Blue Man, performed with the Blue Man Group since, almost the beginning, mostly in Chicago, but also in Tokyo. He was there. And
oh, wow.
He was there when we sort of started working on Backyards. So I worked with Louis Simon. Mike Brosco, my producer's friend, came in from Idaho and did drums for the Backyards album. But Eric was back from Japan for Hidden Drives, and I'd started recording keeper guitar tracks to a click track for some of the songs, like Hidden Drives or Redwoods. So there was definitely a sort of the guitar tracks that you hear were already there just to a click track. And I kind of thought, let's just get started, and then when we can work everything out, we'll have Eric come down and cut the drums to a click track with the actual kind of echoey guitars and such on some of the songs.
Okay.
So I pretty much probably just told him, these 5 songs, definitely Hidden Drives, the 5 songs that have drums. And he only came down for a day and a half, and we, cut everything pretty quickly. But he definitely said, I was listening to it, and I think, maybe I could come up with something. And so it was like really, so let me play, what I have. And so Mike Brosco pressed play and record, and just like, the guitar is sort of building and building. He's playing some cymbals, and then he comes in, and it was just like, wow, that's really, really great. So it was a nice, it was good to have.
Yeah.
I think on the previous record, Backyards, I think, every track has drums. And for the previous records, I think I'd actually worked, had actually some songs that did not have drums, so that it wasn't quite all so much, completely a rock record. There were some more ambient spaces and such. So I, without really thinking about it, Backyards definitely was a very drum-oriented record. But for Hidden Drives, definitely wanted a few tracks. And also just when you're, just a stereo mix can only highlight so much, and there's always a couple of small parts that sound so great when you cut them. It's like, oh, this is going to be great. You listen to them loud as you're cutting them, and then suddenly they kind of become all part of the big picture. And so I specifically said to Dylan at Badman and to Mike Brosco, let's do mixes of the drum songs, without the drums, or with some, just so maybe you can see some of those extra parts on. And so that's why there are those extra five, I think, mixes.
Yes.
That definitely has Redwoods. And, it was a way to say to Mike Brosco, just make it sound different and add some things. Mike Brosco is always grabbing my sort of guitar tails, or a note here and a note there, and then putting it through all sorts of experimental kind of plugins and things like that. So there is a wide field of ambience that he is able to create around some of these songs.
Is there, or are there plans to play this live when it's possible? And do you, even with the other albums, when you play live, are you putting a band together, or are you doing it just you and a drummer?
Definitely in the past, the best scenario is a bass player, a guitarist, and a drummer, or even another guitarist. Brian Crum from Chicago sometimes plays with me. But and when I went to Greece, I did take Nick McCree on bass guitar and Eric Jabot on drums. But other times I hooked up with some friends in Greece to then, just show up myself. We rehearsed a couple times, and that worked out pretty well as well. I have been playing the bass pedals. So for the last record, Eric and I did go to the East Coast, and we did play a couple of shows with just drummer, guitarist, and me playing the bass parts. And it's challenging, but it's very simple, and it kind of, it's nice to just have 2 people on stage with that sort of sound.
Yeah. What kind of gear do you use when you play live? Do you have to use a lot of looping or samples to create the lushness of the albums?
No, I pretty much just play the parts and hope that I can play the rhythm parts in the low areas and then have hanging notes in the upper areas and play melodies and work around the bass pedals as well. So,
Wow.
A song like Island Lake, I'm able to. There's some pretty quick moves. I mean, I'm no John Paul Jones playing bass pedals and the piano parts for the ocean,
Right.
but Island Lake does have that sort of a couple notes played pretty quickly, and is able to work out things with Eric so that we were able to do a pretty good dramatic version of that song, kind of heavy feel, and so I'm hoping to try and do that again.
I've kept you for over an hour, and thank you so much for all your time. Where can people pick up the album? How can they order it? And what kind of formats is it coming out on?
It's coming out on CD. Badman's also doing the vinyl and is download. Badman has pre-ordering on their website, and it's just www.badmanrecordingco.com, and so that's the best place to go. Order it directly from the source, but there's definitely all sorts of other sites that you can that it is showing up on. So
Do you have a social media presence where people can follow you to see what's going on if things open up and you can't get out and play live, or any other news?
Yeah, there's a Lanterna Facebook, page, and there's a Lanterna website where we post some of the video trailers for the album, but also the videographer Ben Geyer, who's in a band called Sleep Out. He's a drummer up in Chicago, actually, but he also does these fantastic videos. He has we have the first video up on YouTube and on the Lanterna page for Hidden Drives, and it's his floating camera sort of he finds old houses out in the Midwest somewhere, some really stark imagery and just wonderful stuff. And so you can see that definitely on the YouTube page for Badman, or for Lanterna, or the Lanterna website, which is just lanterna.tv.
I do have one more question for you. I can't believe I forgot to ask you this. How did you come up with the name Lanterna?
Sure. Yeah, I was about to move from Moon Seven Times name to Lanterna name. I was speaking with someone about 2 weeks ago, and I mentioned, well, I went to the bass player from Ack-Ack was living in New York. He took me to this restaurant called Lanterna, and a few weeks ago, someone I was interviewing with, said, "Oh, I know that place all the time. I go there all the time on, South something or other in New York." And so I guess I do remember, taking the card from the restaurant with Lanterna and thinking, that's pretty cool. That's one word. I also had these very old Italian to English to Italian dictionaries from like 1880.
Oh,
and
wow.
So all these sort of old words or old kind of definitions of, what a lanterna was, or the early magic lantern, which was sort of a early projector or slide projectors.
Oh, okay.
So the Lanterna Magica was kind of something I, with my art history background, sort of the sitting in dark rooms looking at slides and artwork flashing on the walls, I just decided Lanterna was a good title for this one-off limited edition box set photo booklet on a cassette, of course.
Right.
With, so that was definitely like the name, and it's been a good name to stick with. Choosing band names, as you may know or have talked to people who have tried to choose band names in the past, it's really a tough thing.
It's you almost have to just make up words at this point.
But nowadays you can definitely, all you have to do is kind of go and start searching for it and find out, oh yeah, there's another 10 bands who have the same name.
Oh yeah. The internet has helped and hurt. Henry, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. It's been wonderful chatting with you, and I really do enjoy listening to the music. The new album is really wonderful.
Well, thank you. It's been great to talk to you.